This is The Big Shut-In, Stories from Quarantine. So it's Sunday, March 22nd, and in a lot of ways, I'm just now having any kind of bandwidth to start paying attention to what's going on outside of my house. You know, we're settling into a routine, kind of, and I'm starting to be more aware of more reports about what's happening in other parts of the city, other parts of the country. You know, I live in this really pretty bougie little neighborhood in Western Queens. There's a lot of single-family, two-family houses with little yards. A lot of them are on these sort of shared courtyards. There's a lot of trees, and there's a lot of kind of upper-middle-class white people with what I think of as, you know, pink-collar jobs, kind of creative fields, and, you know, graphic designers and writers, college professors, business consultants, you know, a podcast producer. And everyone around me, all the people I would normally be interacting with on a day-to-day basis, are absolutely on lockdown right now. When I've had to leave the house, it's a ghost town. You see a person on the sidewalk where, you know, on a nice day, you'd normally see dozens. But there's reports coming out now that other parts, even of the city, are not quite so locked down, even though everyone must be aware at this point that this is absolutely the recommendation, that this is what we need to be doing. I saw news stories going around Facebook and stuff about people sitting out in parks. You know, the sun was out, they wanted to get some fresh air, and crowding into these city parks, and people standing in line for carryout in ways that, you know, they're packed into a queue. And in a lot of ways it makes sense, you know. I live in a row house, but it's a house nonetheless. And so nobody but my wife and kids and I are going to be coming in and out of that front door. But, you know, if you live in an apartment building with 100 units in it, and each apartment has at least 2 people living in it, even if everybody in the building only leaves the house once a day for 5 minutes, that's 600 people going in and out of that door. And so it's not so easy to maintain a social distance in a place like New York City. And there are a lot of reasons here and elsewhere why someone might reject that recommendation. I might just say, you know what, I have to live my life. It might be selfishness, it might be necessity, it might just be pure stir-crazy desperation. Anyway, that's a lot of what I ended up talking to my friend Naomi about. She is a college professor in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, with a husband who's a stay-at-home dad and 2 kids who are older than mine.
Things are settling in now that it's been about a week for us.
How are things there now? Are people kind of down with the program? Are people hunkering in and quarantining themselves, or are they saying it's nonsense and hitting the streets?
I don't know. I mean, all my understanding of what's going on out there is very anecdotal because I myself have been pretty secluded for the past week. And so I see stuff online. I hear kind of the talk coming through my Facebook feed or my Instagram. There's a lot of anger on the part of people who are clearly in economically precarious positions, and they have every right to be angry when they don't have real economic relief in sight and they're being asked to stay home and they live month to month on an hourly wage. So I think that, you know, there are the people that are just dismissing the socially responsible advice. And then there are people that have a sort of simmering anger about the quarantine that I think they have a really important point to make, which is they can't stay home if they can't eat. I'm hearing that kind of response from people like small business owners or wage workers in the service sector, who feel like their livelihood is under threat. And it's becoming increasingly urgent. The first of the month is coming up pretty quickly, and at some point people are just going to run out of money to buy food, and then I don't know where we're at. So I feel like there's a lot of conflating the people who are just out on spring break and dismissing kind of good medical advice, and then another group of people who are resentful of the quarantine and questioning its necessity, in part because they have their own necessity that runs counter to it.
I've been amazed. Economics has never been my strong suit to begin with, but I've been sort of amazed at how quickly things are being
Mhm.
forced to close and how quickly people are being laid off, even from sort of big institutions that I would have thought
Terrifying.
could kind of hang on for, I thought, we a month, 2 months in, people would be losing their jobs, but I didn't realize it would be days in, day 3, a
Yeah.
big, the cultural institution or a big company is laying people off. That I don't know. I mean, it seems like everything in the entire economy is month to month to some degree or another. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
some of it driven by greed and some by necessity. But yeah, I think that's capitalism, right? I mean, capitalism is dynamic, so very rapid adjustments are possible, but rapid adjustments that don't necessarily serve the common good or democracy or what we would consider the public. For me, right now, my anxiety about the global economic fallout of what's taking place actually surpasses my anxiety about the virus itself. So,
I
yeah,
was,
I'm very concerned about, am I going to hold on to my house,
yeah.
with whatever comes next?
I mean, I was with you a week ago, and I completely where I was saying I'm not worried about health, I'm worried about money. But honestly, now where I'm sitting in New York, my fear about the virus has grown exponentially in the last 24 hours.
Sure.
When I'm seeing the numbers that, we've gone from 800 cases to 8,000 in the city limits in 1 week.
Oh
That
yeah.
that
No, but
that's
yeah, I mean,
fast, and that people in their 30s are ending up on respirators. So
sure.
I'm not.
And I
All I'm
think,
saying is my economic fear came first, and now my medical fear has caught up with it, and so now I'm equally afraid of both things, which is awesome.
yeah.
Um,
Oh, that's a good place to be. No, I mean, I understand. I mean, I understand the necessity of the quarantine. Like, I totally am on board with that. But if the quarantine is necessary, so is very urgent and immediate, massive economic aid, right?
yeah,
You can't have the quarantine be sustainable and effective if you don't have the economic piece. Like, it's just going to be impossible. So if I want the quarantine to work, and I would like it to work, then the other piece just has to happen. And or I don't know what happens next. The shaming of the people that were pointing to the costs of the quarantine, as it's imposed, and sort of resentful of the quarantine, I thought was really hard for me to take, given the already, like, I have a huge amount of generational angst sort of brewing, because the virus, as you said, is attacking people our age. It's attacking younger people. My younger sister, who I adore, is in a very precarious situation because of pre-existing conditions. I'm worried about my partner, who has high blood pressure. So, I'm not saying the virus doesn't attack younger people, but the primary target of the most deadly version of the virus appear so far to be people in their 60s and above. It is,
For
the
sure.
death rates are just obscene for that generation. And, I have to say, and this is really hard, but I am so angry at that generation when I look at the voting patterns, when I think about climate change, when I think about how they have impeded efforts to extend healthcare access to my children's generation, and when they seem kind of willfully ignorant of the precarity they've produced in the economy with their decisions, and then my children are being asked to sacrifice their economic future to help save them. I was so angry. Now, don't get me wrong. I would do it because, I would set up this quarantine because I do have a lot of individual loved ones that I want to protect out there, from the transmission of this disease. But if I'm forced to make difficult choices between my children and my elders, my children come first, and
Of course
that's
they do.
the bottom line.
For everyone.
And yeah,
Your
absolutely.
elders would even
true.
insist
but
that you make that choice, I would think.
no,
I mean,
that's not true. That's not true. Because it is my elders who are very actively robbing my children of their future. I am so angry when I look at the generational divide in politics. I don't think my elders put my children first. I think that they have very actively continued to undermine the environment, my children's access to health care, which already was, even though I have a middle-class salary, when my daughter gets a fever, she goes in the bathtub, excuse my language, to cool off before I call the doctor because I have a $7,000 deductible. So even before this was happening, it wasn't like we could go to the doctor just because we felt bad. And it is the elder generation that is primarily responsible in denying the economic changes that they set into motion that have caused the vulnerability to this crisis. So my elders have not put my kids first. So my son is struggling. He's 16, and he was already kind of hanging on by a thread when this all started with high school, and he's an angsty kid just like I was an angsty kid at that age. And the first day I tried to homeschool him on Monday morning, I started trying to get him to work, and then I went off to the store to drop off some food for the food pantry locally, just to do a drop off. And I came back, and he had rejected my husband's attempts to get him to continue working, and they had a scuffle because my son decided he was leaving the house. And my husband tried to stop him, and they had a physical altercation then, and my son had left, shouting all sorts of very emotional things about how he never wanted to see any of us again. And my husband was left kind of mildly battered from it when I showed up. And then I spent that morning, the first morning of our kind of official quarantine, driving around to Bridges, hoping my son wasn't going to be a jumper, because I didn't know what he would do. I mean, he'd left the house not dressed to be outside, and he hadn't made contact with any of his friends, parents, or friends. I went to the police station, to find out how long I had to wait to make a report. And fortunately, he came home after a couple hours. But it's just that the situation we're in isn't normal. It's really difficult for him to grapple with. And I think it causes him a great deal of anxiety, and that turns to anger. And he gets angry at me because I'm his mom. And he rebels against authority, which is what teenagers are supposed to do.
In a house in quarantine, there's literally no one else to rebel against.
Yeah. Where are you going to go? He's having a really hard time with the social isolation. Like he really, my son has a very tight, small group of friends, and they cling to one another like a life raft. And the fact that that support system is now online only is a major, that's a major blow. And so anytime I try to take away the devices that allow him this sort of constant communication with his friends so that he can then concentrate on schoolwork, that for us becomes the potentially explosive moment where emotions run really high. At one point, I noticed when he was trying to do his schoolwork later in the week, we had managed to talk him into it. He had it set up so that Snapchat would be constantly blinking in the background with messages whenever his friends were communicating, which was always. And I made some kind of a comment, well, no wonder you can't concentrate. You've got this thing blinking on your screen. And he became really upset with me and said, don't make fun of my friends. And, and I was like laughing about it because it was just so obvious to me that this had to be shut off if he was going to accomplish anything intellectual effectively. But emotionally, that represented something else to him that right now I don't think I can shut off, even if it means that he doesn't get his homeschooling done and he doesn't pass this grade and he doesn't get out, like whatever that little blinking light is doing with all those messages, it's doing something that has to be done for him.
What's the lifeline? It's the last connection to his normalcy. I understand that.
And routine's important for him, and that social connection is just really important for him. This might be the end of his high school. I don't know if he's going to be able to go back. He's certainly not getting. We can't homeschool him. So I don't know what happens next for him. This might be it.
Yeah. There's only so much you can do, I guess. The academic necessity is interesting. I hadn't. My son's in first grade, right? So we're not feeling particularly, we don't feel like there's particular urgency for him to complete all of the work that they're sending over on Google Classroom every day.
Yeah.
Because he's not going to fail out of first grade over this. They're not going to do that. But not graduating high school, that's heavy.
Yeah, if my son had been an A student going into this, I probably wouldn't be worried. I would be okay. But just the very week before the quarantine, I was in a parent-teacher conference where they were telling me that he was at risk of failing his classes because he doesn't do his work. They all rave about how intelligent he is. He's a really bright kid, but we can't get him to do schoolwork at home. And we've never been able to really do it. And so he was only possibly going to pass because he had study hall periods in school where he had kind of directed, structured time at school to do it. And without school to structure him, it's, I can't make up for that. There's just no way because he already wants to challenge my authority, and we already have a different kind of emotional thing happening between us as his parent. And he was so close to failing his classes and already failing some of them that it's not like I don't imagine the teachers are going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I just don't. I don't know. Like maybe we'll get really lucky and all the teachers will hand out passing grades because they'll just recognize how exceptional this particular moment in history is. That's my hope. But if they don't, I don't see how he would pass his class. So that thin thread that he was hanging on to kind of keep his life in order has been cut by this. I was just so angry. That was just the dominant emotion. Maybe that's just me. That's how I react. I get angry, not sad. But I was so angry that that all of this was happening in that larger kind of context, that larger political context where I felt like here we're trying to save the very people who have stood in the way of making a humane economy where we would have access to health care and we'd have the very kinds of institutions that would prevent a crisis like this. And now my son's going to be in a more precarious situation if he can't finish high school. So for me, it was very much like, as a mom, I was having a very difficult time grappling with what I recognize are going to be the long-term costs of this as it unfolds.
This is The Big Shut-In. My name is David Hoffman, and this is a production of Race Car Radio. If you have any feedback for me or have a story that you would like to share, you can write me an email at thebigShutin@racecarradio.com.